My name is Isaac Kato. I'm the co-founder and CFO of Verne Global, and thank you to Bala and the sponsors of the event. I see that I have the highly coveted 2:40 post-lunch coma slot, so let's get a little interactivity going here. How many people are here from Iceland? How many Icelanders? Okay, wow, okay. So on three, let's get an Á from Ísland, okay? 1, 2, 3. Á from Ísland. Never fails, never fails. Okay, so, whoops. So let's see here. Okay, well, I'm going to, I think I messed it up. I'm going to give you guys a brief Reader's Digest history of Verne Global, and then I'll give you my own very biased and hopefully controversial perspective on the pros and cons of doing a startup here in Iceland. Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay, great. So a few quick words on my background. I'm going to go back. Quick words on my background. I'm both a serial entrepreneur as well as a venture capital investor. I started my first company in 1995, and actually Brad Feld was one of my angel investors. And then I spent about 12 years on the venture side, most recently with General Catalyst Partners, which is a big US venture firm. And through them, I led our investment in CCP Games here. And I've been an alternate director on their board for the past 6 years and worked closely with that company. And then most recently, I co-founded and then joined as CFO a bit later, Verne Global, which has built the first large-scale data center here in Iceland. I've probably been to Iceland about 120 times in the last 6 years. Business aside, I bring my wife and children here every summer, and we all love it. We have lifelong friends here, so we are passionate about Iceland. And one of the things that I like about Verne is that we have a chance here to really help revitalize and strengthen the Icelandic economy, which matters a lot to me personally. So let's get going. Verne Global is a developer and operator of the first large-scale data center here in Iceland, and the story really starts rolling in 2007, June, about a year after I first started coming here for CCP board work. And Hilmar Pietersson pulls me aside and says, "Hey, Isaac, you guys should really look into data centers." And I had looked at some opportunities in the US data centers, and I said, "Wow, that's a very, very good idea." So why is it a good idea? Well, data centers are a big, rapidly growing, multi-billion-dollar global industry, and if telecommunications is the nerve center of the internet, data centers house the brains. It's an important part of today's knowledge infrastructure. And the biggest problems facing that industry are almost universally all about power. It's about access to power, it's about access to affordable power, it's about avoiding spikes in power pricing, which happens a lot, particularly in Europe. And if you care about being green, it's about avoiding carbon emissions that come with consuming as much power as data centers do, because data centers, at least in industrialized nations like the United States, consume about 2.5% of all power generated, which is quite a lot. So these are big problems facing the industry today when you look at things like shutting down nuclear plants, when you look at increasing green sentiment, when you look at instability in the Middle East, power's really the biggest problem facing the industry, and it's also usually the single biggest cost of running a data center. So enter Iceland. Iceland almost uniquely solves many, if not all, of the big power problems facing the data center industry. So here we have extremely attractively priced energy. It's very stably priced, so you can get a very long-term stable contract. And the power grid here is terrific. It's one of the most stable in the entire world. And it happens to be dual-sourced renewable. So there's 100% renewable electricity here from geothermal and hydroelectric sources. So data centers love Iceland, or they should love Iceland. Okay? We seeded the business in 2007. We spent the first year with Project Verne, as it was then called, trying to work with the Icelandic government to encourage them to lay the second submarine cable called Danice. Without a second redundant cable, there is no data center industry here, and happily about a year after that, they moved ahead. And at that point, we funded the business seriously, and we began to really build our business, and we recruited a superstar team. We got our CEO, a guy named Jeff Monroe, and our CTO, Tate Cantrell, to join. And they each have about 20 years of experience building and running data centers. They were co-founders of DuPont Fabros, which is the second largest wholesale data center company in the United States. And we were really fortunate to get these guys. They know data centers inside and out. And when they came on board, I decided it was time to go for it, and I joined as CFO. So for those few of you who weren't here in Iceland at this time frame, it's worth understanding a little bit about what was going on in Iceland. So in 2007 and most of 2008, Iceland was absolutely booming. This place was going crazy macroeconomically. It was voted by, it was in some UN poll, it was voted the #1 highest quality standard of living in the world. Things were going great. Icelandic businessmen and financiers were being heralded as Viking geniuses, and you know, champagne was like flowing in the streets of Iceland. It was like just a full-blown party. More Land Rovers than you could shake a stick at, and I think there was actually a plan by the government that never got passed to give each newborn child in Iceland a Land Rover of their own. So things were really booming, and we went for it big. We raised a bunch of money. We signed some big contracts, but then of course, you know, the taller you are, the harder you fall. And come October 2008, about 3 months after I started full-time, Iceland spectacularly imploded, okay? And in 1 week, all 3 of the big banks collapsed, taking down about $100 billion of wholesale loans with them. And Iceland really entered kind of a bit of an existential crisis. So, I mean, it was really, you know, it was really a question, like, what's gonna happen here? And, you know, a few months after that, the government coalition failed, and, you know, there was rioting, and, like, Iceland was just burning. I mean, the whole world thought Iceland was burning. And so if you're building a startup speculative data center, that's a really bad thing, okay? Because we had a fantastic value proposition. We always have. I mean, we save our customers tons of money, and we dramatically reduced their carbon footprint. But they're also conservative buyers, and if they perceive risk, I could give the service away for free, and they're not going to put their servers in our data center. So, so this is a real problem. The interesting thing is that going into 2009, we actually still had quite a lot of momentum. We had a large anchor tenant signed up. We had a very large financing package lined up, ready to go, and so our momentum kind of carried us through the year, and we started actually building. And this, but as things got squirrelier and squirrelier here throughout 2009, our customers started to get loose on the hook and eventually swam away. And at that point, we really had no choice but to go into deep survival mode, cockroach style. And we literally took our huge data center campus project and put it on ice. We let go most of our employees, and we went into deep cash conservation mode. And so this picture is really kind of sad. It was taken a few months after the shutdown, and you know, for at least a year after the shutdown, that huge crane in the middle just sat there, creaking in the wind. It was very challenging. So, so we entered 2010, frankly, a bit lost in the desert. I mean, we knew we still had a value proposition. We still had customer interest, but nothing immediate. And it was a very, very tough and unpleasant time. And then, of course, to add insult to injury, it's been mentioned several times, but Eyjafjallajökull blows up in the spring of 2010. And then, you know, all anybody could talk about for months was volcanoes, volcanoes, volcanoes. Like, you know, the foreign press made it sound like Iceland was just one big bubbling lava field that had gone over our data center. And, you know, needless to say, if you guys heard about it, our customers definitely heard about it. But, you know, this was one of those things where what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And actually what this really, in a very perverse way, this gave us even more conviction that we were doing the right thing, because what we realized was this was 100% a perceived risk, and well, 99% perceived risk, and the actual risk could be well managed with good engineering and, you know, good product design. And because what would have happened if you'd been a customer of ours in 2010 when the volcano went off was nothing. Your service would have been delivered just perfectly. The power would have been there, the electricity would have been there, the cooling would have been there, people would have showed up for work, and so it was purely a perceived risk. So we also used 2010 to really streamline and restructure the business, both operationally and financially. We took a lot of fixed costs out of the business, we restructured some of our bigger contracts, and we laid some more key enabling infrastructure. So first enabling infrastructure here is power, of course. The second was the cable, and the third was we got a tax incentive package, but the third one was we needed the government to make a couple of subtle but absolutely critical changes to the tax regime here. And so we pushed for that for a long, long time. There was a little bit of polite parliamentary debate, but in the end, the Icelandic government did the right thing, and the law was passed. So we actually entered 2011 with some renewed vigor. You could see that Iceland was starting to pick up macroeconomically. And in case you're not aware, Iceland looks great right now on a relative basis to the rest of Europe, and we could really start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we went to our board and our investors with a slightly reconfigured product and go-to-market strategy, and we presented to them, and they really liked it. And based on that, we were able to recapitalize the business and raise a bunch of new money from a group called the Wellcome Trust, which is one of the largest charitable trusts in the UK. And based on that, we were actually able to resume construction in kind of the middle of the year and get moving again. And this is a picture of a very happy CFO standing in front of, and this is like late 2011, standing in front of our newly installed module. Now, just for the record, I have that yellow vest on, but I just raised the money to build the shit. You know, I leave the actual building and running of it to my very talented partners. But you know, you don't want to give me a power tool, let alone let me mess around with high voltage, multi-million-dollar electrical gear. So I'm just standing there. Okay, so enter 2012, and we are live. I mean, this is just like a great turnaround. This is our fully armed and operational Death Star data center, and you know, we have those are generators and generator tanks, and we have anchor customers who are live now. We are well capitalized. We are aggressively marketing and selling, and actually, this thing is the greatest. So for years, we would show stock photos of other people's racks, okay? But these are ours now, and it feels great, okay? Okay, so anyway, that's the very brief story of our 5-year-old startup, and we're just on the dance floor now. But we feel very excited, and we think that the data center industry is going to come to Iceland in a very, very big way over the next few years. Okay, so part 2 here, and I'm going to give you some very subjective, biased perspective. Okay, this is some practical feedback from you guys, from someone who's spent a lot of time with you guys. I fully expect you to disagree, but I'm basically going to profile the shit out of you guys, okay? So, and just because this is my view, not the views of Vern or other Americans, so if you don't like it, take it out on me, but not them, okay? Okay, all right, sue your ass. Okay, so obviously you guys are innately entrepreneurial. Any fool who would get into an open sailboat in the middle of the North Atlantic has to be somewhat entrepreneurial, right? You know, maybe not the Irish slaves that you forced to get on, but you know, the Vikings are kind of the original entrepreneurs. So, you know, you have a high tolerance for risk, pain, and discomfort. You enjoy breaking the rules, obviously. Okay, you're fiercely independent, tenacious, and you're open to new ideas, which I also equate with creativity, of course. And this one, you're poor listeners. Okay, now that's actually not such a bad thing when you're doing a startup, because you know, you get a lot of advice when doing a startup from people who are very smart and often more experienced than you are, and they'll tell you why what you're doing is a bad idea. Every time my companies, people I respected say, "Ah, that's not such a good idea." In fact, I called Brad when we were starting this, and because I said, "Hey, Brad, I know you've done a lot of data center work. What do you think about this idea?" And he said, "I don't like it. You know, data centers are very capital intensive. I don't like it." And I said, yeah, but ours is different. It's better. It's better. Okay, so Brad was actually making a total understatement. I had no idea how ungodly capital intensive data centers are, but anyway, he was totally right. But you know, thank God I didn't listen to it, because we do have access to a lot of capital, which is yeah, exactly. So anyway, that went well. Okay, so broad generalization number 2, you're extremely resourceful and innovative, but you suck at process. Okay, so my friend Hilmar Pietersson has this great line. He says, whatever you do, don't get on a ship that has been designed by Icelanders, because it'll probably sink. Right? But if you're on a sinking ship, grab the nearest Icelander, and he will certainly get you to shore. Okay? And okay, so and obviously the first thing is much more important. But at some point, your company gets to the point where you actually do need a little process, a little quality, a little stability, and that's when you should go and hire some Americans or Germans or Japanese, no Italians, but anyway, okay. So broad generalization number 3. Okay, very strong technically, especially in the software arts, weak at enterprise selling. Okay, I don't need to elaborate on the first point. You guys know, I mean, the coding prowess here in particular is great, and especially when there's that intersection of technology and art. Iceland just has like the magic touch, and I definitely think that's an area of strength for this country. That on selling, not so much. So the typical Icelandic selling process is, hello, my name is Sven. I have this great product. We are distantly related, and you should buy it. And that works pretty well here. I mean, that's the thing, it works pretty well here. The problem is when you're selling overseas to some bloated, big, bureaucracy-laden American or continental European country, they require a slightly more sophisticated and complex selling process. So that's, and there are very few exceptions here that I've met of people who actually can do enterprise selling well, but it's not innate to, I think, most Icelanders, and I think it's something you eventually have to go out and get. Now, the good news is you can do consumer business, and even within the enterprise, you see more and more consumer-like technology seeping in that doesn't necessarily require, purchasing and risk to sign off. But nonetheless, this is usually an area of weakness. And you got to keep in mind, unless you have a, torrid, organically, virally growing company, in which case people are just going to throw money at you, fundraising is fundamentally enterprise selling, and you have to be somewhat sophisticated. Okay, broad generalization number 4, excellent university system, very few ecosystem companies. The universities here are great for just building raw talent and skill, and there's a very nice balance here between the theoretical and the practical, which I like a lot. But as has been said, there are not enough ecosystem companies here, and I'll elaborate a bit about why that's important. It's just a matter of time. I mean, we'll get there. We've got CCP, Model, Usser, maybe someday Vern, but those are important sources of some key ingredients of startup and entrepreneurial success. So Iceland is a great cocoon during the incubation phase, but access to outside talent, mentorship, and capital is very constrained. So what I mean by that is Iceland is a great place for the early stages of a company. You typically have a great family network here. The government provides excellent education and healthcare, and so you can really focus on your business and not be as distracted. But at some point, you need a little bit more, and it's hard to get this stuff here. It's very hard to recruit people to Iceland, and again, sooner or later, you're probably going to need specialists, either domain experts or functional experts. And just watching CCP grow, it's really, really hard to get people to come here. Okay, so that's one problem. Similarly, mentorship, without a lot of ecosystem companies, mentorship is hard. And it's really important. I mean, even if you're a bad listener, you really want to surround yourself with people who have been through, who can give you advice. You might ignore it, but it's good to get their perspective. And while I think fundamentally it's up to the entrepreneur to drive his or her ultimate success, a good board member or advisor can make a difference. And I'll give you another case in point. I mean, this is Brad Feld Day, but when we were selling our first company, the acquirer got cold feet at the 11th hour. And Brad, who was already a very prominent, successful venture capitalist, walked into the guy's office and he did his Brad advisor Jedi mind trick, and he said, these are not the droids you're looking for, and you will acquire this company. And the guy did it. So, they do make a big difference, okay? It's still up to you to run the company, but mentorship is important. And then, access to capital. Okay, so it is hard, I think, for most companies here to attract foreign capital into Iceland for a variety of reasons. Number one, people don't know the rules, and most investors are pretty lazy, and they're not going to bother to go through the brain damage of learning the investment rules. The kind of investor protections and capital structures that you're used to in the States are typically not as common here. And then currency controls just scare the piss out of people. Now, you can actually leverage those, as we have, to your advantage, but when most people hear the word currency control, they just go, not going to touch it. So my kind of very obvious advice, which you'll probably ignore because you're bad listeners anyway, is know your strengths and weaknesses. This is a place of extremes. It plays out everywhere. There's some real strengths here, but there are definitely some weaknesses, and you want to figure out how to complement those holes. I think you got to be prepared to go outside from day one to get access to the good stuff. And just to be really clear, that doesn't mean abandoning Iceland at all. I mean, it means possibly setting up an office outside, possibly putting the top company outside, but there's still, you know, this is where the heart and the soul and the energy comes from. It doesn't mean leaving Iceland. It just means not being stuck in Iceland forever and thinking about going outside if you need to. And lastly, you know, nothing to it but to do it. So thank you very much, and skál.